Lloyd Brown, welcome.
Thank you.
Why whales fail. Today we're talking about the hidden cost of fast oil, why patience pays millions in well production. So this is a different way of thinking. Where does this come from?
Well, it originally came from just experience, but now we know why. And the why is it's tied to what is the degradation process, or what's the process of disrupting geology. And one thing is we're also learning that this doesn't hold true to every type of geology, but the majority of shale unconventional geology, this holds true, and it's because there's an impact, and many of the processes and products that are currently used on the geology are trying to lift oil off of the rock instead of really making it mobile. It's trying to um, artificially move that oil to a different place. You ever seen a dishpan full of grease and you put a drop of Dawn in it and it makes, well, that's what happens when we have the wrong kind of chemistry on the rock. It strips that oil off of it, just like it lifts it off a pan, and it lets it get water wet so it can clean it off. Well, getting the water on the rock is the beginning of massive disruption, because then what happens is we shut in the wells with this non-native, non-alike water. And again, this is also why recycled produced water works better than fresh water, because it looks more like what it's used to. But that immediate oil that comes off, what it's done is it's allowing the rapid process of disruption and the desire of the geology to get back to equilibrium. And so all kinds of chemical reactions begin. And I want to remind everybody, we've got temperature, we've got pressure, and we've got time. And so what we've learned is one of the signs that disruption has occurred is that we see early oil coming back when the wells opened up. And usually when it's been really disrupted, that oil is emulsified. It's got an emulsion that's tied with water and usually some metals, many times iron and or sand, and we have to deal with that at the surface. And so, but you see the oil, you think, all right, it's there. Man, it's good. We've got it. But what that is really telling you is that we artificially enhanced the mobility of that oil off the near bore rock, and we've now created we've basically impaired the geology from being able to allow the rest of the oil that's not near wellbore or further out within the fracture planes to migrate to the well. And so that's where seeing it really quick, really fast initial productions, actually, from our learning, and again, to qualify this, in unconventional shale geology, this holds true. And it holds true almost every time. We've almost never seen that this not be the case. And then there's secondary things that we're looking that are showing the disruption, but it leads to peak and valley production. And shale has been known as something that is a really high initial production and then a strop decline. Well, our studies, our evidence shows that if we allow the connection to happen and we stabilize the geology and put it into a dynamic equilibrium where we allow the mobility of the hydrocarbon, that we're going to get it's going to take a little bit longer to reach that peak IP, but just the same type of curve that it got us to get to the initial high production rate, the decline will be a similar rate of decline. And that means more revenue over time. It means less problems with the well. And because of our patented technology, and I mentioned last week, we received our European registry and our numbers. We have the only novel way to measure that disruption and also measure that we put the geology into dynamic equilibrium. And the result is our customers experience that they produce more oil over a longer period of time with less of the known typical problems of corrosion, scale, even bacteria, because our process mitigates all three of those.
So the initial oil that quickly shows up can be, at least in this type of shale, can be like a misdirection, meaning like we're programmed to say that's a success, here it comes. But what you're saying is we actually put some barriers in that the oil or the carbon coming from far away has to get past.
That's correct, and it can inside of the fractures, it's either what we call a micro emulsion, and that's a stabilized emulsion that is usually seeded by iron or another metal, and or by the sand, because the sand becomes a seed crystal for scale. And so one of those components has made the oil and the water bind together, which is a bad thing, because then instead of being a smaller molecule, it gets really big. And the force that it takes to move it from the fracture into the wellbore becomes more difficult. The other thing that happens is we get scale, or we see the swelling of the clays. And if you think about it, it's like, you ever been bloated?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what we do to the rock, and it never, ever will become unbloated. Once those clays swell up, or you've seen a playa lake that's got cracks everywhere, and then you get a rain on it and the cracks disappear, that's the swelling of the clays. But at atmosphere, those things swell, contract, and there's a lot of companies in Amarillo that make a lot of money stabilizing your foundation because of that fact. Well, once you go down and you do this in the geology, it's just like the guys that come in and they inject a chemical solution to keep the clays from swelling in your house. That's what you've unintentionally done when you have the wrong process, and you swell them and they stay shut, and they mitigate the ability of the hydrocarbon to migrate into the wellbore. So we call that mobility, hydrocarbon mobility. Then you also have another one is where you if it's not swellable, most of the time, the kind of clays that are involved in unconventional geology are what we call migrating fines. And that's basically that it's breaking apart, and it's got a type of clay that just wants to migrate. And it's like your pool filter. You ever have to backwash your pool filter? Well, those are migrating fines that you have in your water that go and they back up that filter, and you have to purge them out. Well, again, we have no way to purge out migrating fines. And so that's the complexity that we're dealing with. And we've, as an industry, for years, we've guessed to what is happening. Well, with our Pathfinder process and our equilibria testing protocol, you don't have to guess. We know. And one other thing that we're learning right now, Stephen, we understand how much hydrocarbon, the maturity of the hydrocarbon from our protocol, our process. And we can predict whether or not this well is going to provide a highly liquid rich resource, or if it's going to be more gas and provide less, in today's environment, less income, based on what we're going to see coming out of the wellbore.
So to get this clarity in what's going on, it just takes a little bit longer than normal.
From the well, it absolutely does. And also in the protocol, it actually takes time, but we know how much time it takes for us to be able to make the right recommendation once we have the drill cuttings to make the recommendation.
So compared to the typical process and going to the refined process, how should an operator be looking at it? What's the proper expectations that you're setting with them?
Well, the number one expectation is what we predict in the laboratory actually happens. They should see the results, and they will, in our case, what we've predicted and how we prove the stability through what the water tells us and how the hydrocarbon is recovered. That is the proof. And we predict that based on what we've done in the laboratory. We're the only company that I'm aware of that has completely predictive processes that translate to the results that you see in the field. We're it. And that is a big deal. And when we have that ability to say that, and that's, again, I've had so many questions over the patents, our conversation the other day, and they're like, this process patent, what's it mean that nobody has any prior art? Well, what it means is that it's never been documented anywhere in the world, the process that we have to identify the results that we're promising. That's a pretty big deal. We believe that it is, over time, the industry is going to learn that this is going to help us make more income with less wells. We'll have fewer promises that are not kept to our investors. We think that, these things are slam dunks. And when you're writing a check as an investor and an owner in a company through stock, and one well's costing $9 million or $14 million to bring to life, it's a huge capital investment to be guessing whether or not it's going to be economical. And then, is it going to have problems for the life of the well that erodes at the profitability of it? So that's the other thing. It's not only are we helping our customers make more oil, but we're also helping them lower that long-term impact on their lease operating expense, because they don't have to deal with all the consequences of failure from the degradation that happens from putting the wrong thing on the rock. Does that make sense?
Totally. The barometer, the barometer that most people run by is just that what's coming out initially. But what you're saying, if we have this process and we have this audit, then we expect this to start to happen.
And it's not just the hydrocarbon. You have to look at all the fluids that are coming out of the well, because they're going to tell you whether you were successful or not. The water is just as important. You don't get paid for the water. You paid a lot of money to put it in there, and you're going to pay a lot of money to take it out and to deal with it. But it tells you, hey, we're healthy or we're not. It tells you whether or not you got cholesterol and you're going to have a heart attack. The water don't lie. And that's one of the great things that we've discovered.
So we're expecting to see oil real quick, but you're saying don't worry about that at the moment. Let's see what's happening with this water. The water is what we're looking at first.
That's right. And what's funny is now we are also horizontally fracking areas that are more reservoir-like. So reservoirs, for your information, Steve, are the things that we've tapped for the last 100 years. And that's where, Teapot Dome and all these different places that held large quantities of oil, and you hit it and you got a gusher.
Mm-hmm.
Those wells, we've tapped most of those within the domestic U.S., but now we're finding out we've left a lot of oil behind in those. And there's specific ones that we're going in, we're horizontally fracking, and those tend to have a lot bigger highways or porosity than what unconventional does, which you can be a little bit more cavalier with it,
Mm-hmm.
but you can still have a negative impact. And so on those, we actually see our hydrocarbon coming back much quicker. But one of the keys is the key indicators in the water are still there. And when they're not done right, when they're not done with this process, we're still seeing on the competitive solutions, emulsions coming back where we have none, which means emulsions means disruption, which means failure.
Which means it's not in dynamic equilibrium.
That's exactly right.
So the emulsions, when you teach me about the emulsions, what's in them? What's it doing? What's it look like?
Okay. You like Italian dressing?
Yeah.
Do you like vinegar and oil?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between vinegar and oil and Italian dressing?
Some herbs and spices.
That's right. What happens when you take vinegar and oil and you shake it together? It comes right back apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you have spices in it, it stays, and that's an emulsion. That's a classic example of an emulsion. And what happens is if you have that, that means you've got stuff that's come off the rock that's like those spices you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's making that emulsion. So what do you have to do with that? Well, at the surface, we have treaters that apply heat. Sometimes heat will break those apart, and that's all you need. But many times you have to put additional cost in chemical and chemically break that. And the way that that's done is you have things that target those minerals, those materials that are in there, and make them where they're water wet. Well, they'll go with water, so you have clean oil. Because you can't sell water in your oil. All the pipelines reject you if you do that. So you've got to spend the money to clean that up, and it's a significant cost in the industry. So our belief is if we're doing our job well, our customers don't have to have that additional cost many times for the life of the well.
So that initial, when the water comes back, we're seeing the signals on what it's going to take to mitigate that if necessary.
Well, we see it beforehand.
Because from
our work up front, we know what are going to be the mechanisms that will create emulsions, and we design our program around mitigating those items. We want to leave it on the rock.
So then the water coming back initially is your confirmation whether you got your thesis correct or not. That's
correct. And the water looks like what we put in. When it starts flowing back and we're looking at it, it really closely resembles what the original frack water was. And what happens is we see over time that when the reservoir water, the water that's been trapped with the hydrocarbon down there, when we see that transition, that's when we see the oil show up.
Mm.
So that's just one indicator that we have that we've done the right thing.
So the water, if it's done right, then it's not carrying back the items. We're not spending too much time and swelling the clays. We're not picking up, you're calling fines.
Mhm.
So it's coming back clean, meaning that we introduced chaos in a way when we fracked it, and now we're in a perfect tension to where the environment is working in unison in a way, even though it's got pressure and heat and time.
That's right. That's right. Which that in unison really is what the definition of dynamic is.
Mm-hmm.
If we put it in fully back in equilibrium, we will fail because that means we've trapped the hydrocarbon in there. We're just getting the water back that we put in. It looks the same, and it never really gives us the resource that we're investing all this money to get out of the ground.
Wow. And this is just one of many. I'm still in my head, I'm trying to get a list of all the things that we're having to evaluate, right? And this is one of them.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's a series of those, but it's one example.
Well, we're moving the mindset from, hey, let's hurry and get this thing birthed and let's show me the oil. Let's get on to the next one, to no, let's follow a plan and let's verify that our thesis was correct. And it just takes a little bit longer, but in the long run, we prevented all this degradation of equipment, a bunch of extra expenses that suck off the profit of the
That's
well.
correct. And we're moving into a time that we're seeing lower value around hydrocarbon. OPEC has opened up their taps even more. And we're already seeing companies lay down drilling rigs, and there are frac crews that are being idled. And, I haven't looked at the price of oil today. If you look at it every day, drive you crazy. But the trend is that it's going lower, and it makes sense. But we have an industry now that has fiscal discipline. And in that, we're not going to go just chase to produce more because we need to produce more. We're going to do it with purpose. And we're the perfect company to work with for gaining the most out of the wells that you do invest in. And, I had a really great conversation with an individual last week, and we were talking about this dynamic and how it really, this is the perfect time to deploy something different that is predictive. And, once you've got the history, and we're continuing to build upon that every day, the prediction is not only a prediction, but it's a promise that becomes, and promises become something that reputation's built around, right? Well, not only are we building our reputation, but our customers, they're great fiduciaries of a lot of capital that's been put at risk. We're helping them honor that capital that's been invested in them. And that's promise, keeping promise, keeping promise. And that's who we are. That's our goal, is we know that we're going to be successful over a very long period of time because we're promise keepers. And we do that because we have a method to predict and then provide prescriptive methodologies versus having to respond to it after it's already disrupted and it's out of dynamic equilibrium.
So you're offering now, with the lower prices of oil, you're offering a way for them to do be more profitable with less rigs, right? Less.
Well, if you make more per well,
Mm-hmm.
you have to do, let's say you make 10% more.
Mm-hmm.
So every 9 wells you drill, you get 10.
Mm-hmm.
If you're 20% better, the math is the math.
So what's the percentage that you've seen some cases be?
We've seen several cases that have been in excess of 40%.
Wow. What about rehabilitating a well that was birthed incorrectly?
Boy, that, very hard to do. Have had several discussions with some really amazing scientists that are looking at this, because we know that there's been immense amounts of hydrocarbon trapped with our practices over the years. Part of it is, how do you apply and take something that's disrupted and deal with the consequences, right? And then bring it back. And a lot of that is, you've got all this connected geology, the way the fracking works. It's like a spider web when it's done well to get contact with all that oil. How do you go back from something that's been really contained and you've controlled where all of your fluid has gone, to now you don't really have the ability to control it. And so the method of applying has not been perfected. There are people out there absolutely working on rehabilitating wells, some with some success and others with not a lot. It just, and those are areas where we look to partner with companies that understand how to apply it. And if we can get to where we can consistently apply the science to the parts of the well that have been in disruption for years, we definitely can help bring them back into a place of dynamic equilibrium and give that hydrocarbon an opportunity to get back into our wellbore and make more money.
Yeah, it's like these wells are have inflammation. I imagine if they've got the clay swelling, that's probably like the kiss of death. But if it's fines and migrations and these other things, it seems like that would be, just from my limited knowledge, might be a better success rate of addressing those. Am I wrong?
You know what? That's a real good deduction. I don't know if you're right or wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good deduction. It depends if we're creating some new fractures when we go in and do that rework.
Mm-hmm.
If we do, and there's geology that hadn't been touched by that water and swollen, and we can create new pathways, then the swelling is not even as much as it's about the pathways.
Yeah.
If we can create new pathways, then we can rehabilitate it and keep that disruption, or bring it back into that dynamic equilibrium place.
Seems like having to create more pathways is just, we're refracking it, right? And
that's the problem, even with refracking it, you can't control where it goes.
Yep.
It's going to go to the path of least resistance. And there's a lot of companies doing some really neat work with different kinds of diverters and some specific tools to help isolate that. But it's still, I'm not aware of consistent success.
San Juan College is here. Craig's in the house. Shout out to Craig. Thanks for your comments. Mr.
Northeast New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably been on the San Juan River wetting a hook, if I know Craig.
So inflammation. Well, inflammation, how to avoid it, right? Let's do our labs. Let's design our plan, and let's go to work.
That's right.
Any last comments, Lloyd?
No, I just I'm grateful for, I've had several conversations that have been really uplifting about what we're doing here, and I love to hear from folks, and really I'm just grateful, and that's really it.
Well, I'm learning hydrocarbon pathways, fines, migrations. It's only been like 30 conversations, but I'm catching on, Lloyd. Another great episode of Why Wells Fail with Lloyd Brown. Lloyd, what's the best way to connect with you and have a one-to-one?
Lloyd.brown@refinedcompletions.com.
All right. And refinedcompletions.com. Go check it out and get some information. And we'll see you on the next episode of Why Wells Fail.